to meet you. My name is Bernadette, and I'm Kai's aunt, and Kai has a series called the Farmbrook Free Press, and he's a big fan of yours, and I'll let him take it from here.
We are thrilled to have with us today Sucheta Mahajan. Sucheta is a historian and professor at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. She's been a Gillespie Visiting Professor at the College of Wooster, Ohio, U.S., a Fellow of the Indian Institute of Advanced Study, Fellow of the Rockefeller Foundation's Bellagio Center, and a Visiting Professor at the Maison des Sciences de l'Homme, Paris, II. She's also an accomplished author and has written or edited 8 books. Her fields of interest span the short and long history of the 20th century, its politics, political economy, and social change, and the oral history and independence as well as partition of India. Welcome, Sucheta Mahajan. Also mentioned earlier, you've edited multiple historical books. So what is your process for editing books that are about history?
Okay, well, the one which I take the greatest pride in is a book called Towards Freedom in 3 volumes. Now, this is a set of volumes which covers the period 1937 to 47. And it was a project started by the government of India, but with full autonomy given to the historians to include or exclude what they wanted. So there was no interference, which is why some of us took it up. So every year was allotted to a different historian. So I got the worst year, that's 1947, partly because I was seen as a bit of an expert on that year. But the process is actually quite mind-boggling in this case, because this is a compendium of documents. So this involved actually having a team of researchers which collected materials, that is newspapers of that time. They would get the clippings and they would get photocopies, plus, there would be official letters, there would be the private papers of the leaders of the Congress, private papers of the leaders of the Muslim League, private papers of the leaders of, the different parties. So a whole variety of sources were drawn upon and then would be the process of selection and putting them under different themes, giving the references to them, writing a longish introduction, then having an outline, which was the toughest part in a way, which is that you have a kind of, not an index, but something which comes in the beginning of the book, which will have a little sort of summary about each document, which will tell you this is what you can find in it. It was supposed to take 6 months. When I was taken on board this very prestigious project, I was the youngest member in the group. So I was, both very proud and very nervous. And I was told, well, you've written a book on the subject. It shouldn't take you very long, not more than 6 months. I took 10 years.
Wow.
It took 10 years of my life, and I have no regrets. Many people said to me, you could have written, that means, different from editing, that is authored so many books in this time. I said, yes, that would have been my point of view. But this, what I've done to collect the documents, it's like collecting oral testimonies. You would think that the written word is there, it's permanent, it will survive, what's the hurry? But that's not true. The papers are brittle, they crumble, not everything can get digitized in time. So it's really a job not only about selection, but about conservation, about preservation. I think that every document that I included in it now has a history. It has a longer history. It can survive.
I love that.
Yeah.
So what is this something that I'm very personally interested in, because it's been talked about a lot over the past probably 5 years, about how when a new political party comes in to rule anywhere, really, the history books can change. What is the role of politics in history?
Okay. Well, at one level, everything is political, right? Even you and I chatting here, there is a politics in this. But what you're talking is of a different kind. Now here, many people put it like this, in this way. So I'm very glad you asked this question so that I can clarify what is really does happen. Say about 40 years ago, as part of national integration, which is not a bad word, which is part of, India as a country, it's been divided, it's been partitioned. There's all the states are having their own identity on a linguistic basis. There's a kind of anxiety which the state has about keeping everything together. So as part of that, writing the history of the freedom struggle in particular, and commissioning books which would be like part of a common curriculum across the country, right? Written by, it was believed, liberal-minded historians who would be the best in their subject. They would be chosen not for their politics, but, for their competence. So you had at that time, of course, Professor Romila Thapar, who was maybe just in her 30s at that time, Professor Bipin Chandra, Professor Satish Chandra. These were big names of the young generation of good historians who were coming up, promoting what they called a scientific and a secular history. So they were asked to write these books, right? And a council was set up which wrote these, a National Council for Education, Research and Training, NCRT it's called. Now, the problem came only when, for that brief period, 1977 to 79, when Mrs. Gandhi was thrown out after the emergency, she lost the election and the Janata Party came in, and the BJP, with its agenda of communalization of education, came in. So one of the first things the BJP does is to throw these books out. They attack that, but there's not much time to get them rewritten, so things change. But when the Vajpayee government comes, these books are withdrawn, and books, very substandard books, are introduced.
Wow.
Part of our problem, I have been one of those very critical of this kind of attempts to, distort and rewrite history in this partisan way. And I don't buy the line that the earlier books which were there, were written by left historians. So now that you have the right wing coming in, then you have right wing historians need to do their bit. No, not at all. If you read those books carefully, and I've done that exercise, there was nothing left wing in them. Some of the people may have been left wing in their politics, but the books were written from a very liberal perspective. So I would say it's not as if Every party which comes does this. This is what the right wing projects it as. This is what some people project it as. But the fact is that there was a very good body of history writing from a liberal perspective, available, what we all grew up on, different from the colonial kind of writing which was there earlier, different from the communal writing which was there earlier, wasn't liked by the BJP, and it's the BJP which has been behind this whole attempt at pushing out those wonderful books and bringing in substandard and partisan books. It's a shame.
So you've talked about and are really an expert on the subject about how India came out of the bloody partition and became a secular nation. But over the past few years, we've seen a rise in Hindu nationalism with the rise of Modi. Do you think that based on prior history, we could see India become more of a Hindu state, or do you think India will stay secular?
Well, you know, if you asked me this question a few months ago, I would have been more pessimistic. Today, I'm full of hope because I think that one of the silver linings in this terrible cloud of the raging pandemic that we are in the middle of, where we have lost people very dear to us, students, friends, colleagues, family members. Fortunately, I would say there seems to be some glimmer of ordinary people seeing through the present government, seeing its incompetence, seeing looking behind the facade that there is of a strong state, and we've been able to see the terrible incompetence and the whole lack of organization and care that there is behind this present government. So at the moment, there is a very strong voice which is for a national government. It's a time of crisis, and the best in the country must come forward, regardless of political affiliation, to weather this storm. And that is why I have hope that we will be able to, if this feeling builds, we might be able to come out of this terrible, very partisan, very difficult to find even a word for it, but the kind of state and governments that we had in India, as a self-respecting Hindu, I feel ashamed even to use the word Hindu to describe it. I think there's nothing Hindu about them, because Hinduism is a very tolerant religion. This is Hindutva. This is an ideology which was culled out of a very tolerant Hinduism by a very hardcore ideologue called Savarkar. And it is that philosophy, with its hatred against Muslims, hatred against minorities, unfortunately, our great country has fallen into that miasma. But I'm very confident today that we can see a way out.
Beautiful.
Well, I mean, it's been said that those who don't know history are bound to repeat it. And I feel that historians almost have an insight, because in thousands of years of the history of the subcontinent, you can see examples of where it could happen next. So I just find it so cool. I wanted to ask about your books. Is there a single one of your books that you consider your masterpiece?
Good question.
That's well. There's only one. There's not much of a choice. It is my book, Independence and Partition, The Erosion of Colonial Power in India. I still learn from it. So I think there are potentialities in that book which even I didn't further take forward, but I read it and I think, oh, well, that's an interesting point. And I think the scope that was covered was huge. It was only 3 years, 45 to 1948, till Gandhi's assassination. But I've spent the rest of my life just roaming around those years. I mean, I've tried very hard, but there is so much in those years. For the last 1 year, I've been writing up a book on the last years of Gandhiji. From basically building up to his assassination, and but starting with right after the Quit India movement. I have been able to, just before COVID took over the world, I was able to visit Noakhali, which is where Gandhi had spent many months of his life walking barefoot. I was able to visit there, walk those lanes, meet the people there. They remembered his songs, they remembered him, and it was so touching. I was able to visit Bihar and walk again in the villages where Gandhi had walked in 1947 after the gruesome riots. So yes, I think that book would certainly be the book which I think, I put a lot into, and it still, I think, remains a favorite in that sense. Though the book I co-authored with Professor Bipin Chandra, called India's Struggle for Independence, but I have just 2 chapters in that. That's the one which got me to be very famous in India, because that's what, I think it sold about 250,000 or 300,000 copies, So, that's so yes.
It's so cool. I mean, it's really interesting to me because I've interviewed a journalist and an author before, and it's like the process of every writer is so cool and interesting. Especially, I'm a big history buff. I love history. And so
Really?
it's so cool for me personally when I hear like the intricate process that is writing something about history. What advice would you give to people about history and learning history?
Now that's a very interesting one and a tough one. I'd say don't read the standard history books. That would be my first advice, because unfortunately a lot of them are very, very tedious and full of detail. The one thing that young people tell me when I meet them is, oh, I can't remember the dates. I can't remember the names of all the kings. And I sit them down and say, but who told you to? Who expected you to? And, the advice I would give is just free your head of all that information. History is not about that. History is basically, the way I see it, is making sense of the past, but making sense of the past very clearly with the tools of the present. I mean, I can only have my head, right, that is of the present, to make sense of that past. And well, certainly when I do that, when I'm making sense of the past, I very clearly have an eye on the future. I don't mean to say this in a glib way, to just combine past, present, and future. But over time, I have found that that's the only kind of history which makes sense to me. That which comes I feel the second bit of advice would be talk to people around you, observe people around you, and try experimenting with what one might call family history, local history, right? The grocer shop down the corner. Now, is he an Indian, maybe a Gujarati Patel? When did he come from? Where did he come from? Maybe his parents came, There'll be histories of continents. There'll be geographies of continents. Maybe they came from Uganda, and maybe then they came before that 100 years from India. It's that kind of, attention, I would say observation, attention to detail of that kind. I think some of us, I found quite interestingly, those of us who have ended up doing history, we often collected a lot of different things in our childhood. It could have been stamps, it could have been butterflies, but there was something about collecting, that, there's something, whereas those are people I find who declutter, who find it very easy to throw out everything. Well, you're probably not going to make a very good historian, because it's those scraps of paper, those, something which comes up somewhere. It's because, it's not going to make you much money being a historian. You'd be better off, in the stock market or in, Wall Street or somewhere, So, it's not a well-paid profession being an academic in a country like India, right? We're not badly off compared to the rest of people, so no complaints. But it's not something you do to make money. It has to be interest. And the third thing, and that's the last thing I'd say about this advice, which is that train to be a professional historian. For some stupid reason, I don't go around being an engineer. I don't go around being a space scientist, but everybody goes around being a historian. People think that history is about, bloody hell, we've studied, we've spent long hours doing tutorials, how to footnote, how to collect material, how to balance one fact against another. There's a whole process. It's not just about, getting some facts and putting them and linking it sensationally, and you have, a best-selling historian. I mean, that really gets my goat, when just about everybody is a historian. So I just said, what was I doing, all these years?
I really like that. And I when it comes to, as we've talked about a lot in this interview, the independence, communalism languages, where does the diversity yet unity of India come from?
That's a great question. And the answers are so cliched, because the word unity and diversity was used very beautifully by Jawaharlal Nehru, our first prime minister and great leader, as you know. But it became a bit of a cliche after that. But yes, our diversity is in our languages. I was thinking the other day that when I grew up, I spoke Punjabi with my grandma and Mataji, who brought us up, and they didn't speak any other language. I spoke Hindi with my playmates in the lanes, in the colony, in the neighborhood, because they were from other parts of the country, some of them. And I spoke English, very good English for that time, in my school. It was an Irish convent. It was a convent run by Irish nuns, and they made mincemeat out of you if you didn't take the English seriously. And later on, I picked up Bengali. My sister was married to a Bengali, but in our university, for my research, I wanted to read something in the original, so I picked up that. And then I was very interested in doing some comparative work on the French Empire. You know, I'd looked at Britain, British decolonization, but I wanted to see what the French did with their colonies. How did they get out? Or they didn't get out. So I ended up studying some bit of French, which stood me in good stead. So not bad for a person who's not I'm not a, you know, as I said, a linguist, or I'm not somebody who ever set out to learn all these languages. I'm just an ordinary person. And I find it's the diversity we have just naturally in India is much more than one would have in, say, I would say England or Ireland. No, Ireland, of course, they have their own language, but say England, you know, one language. So, yeah, there's a lot. Language, really, there is a lot of diversity. And yet, Kai, what's amazing is that Bollywood, our cinema, everybody understands it. Everybody understands the rhetoric, the tears, you know, and even the TV shows are translated into different languages, and they are shown in Manipur, in Arunachal Pradesh, all the what we call the Saas Bahu stories, the stories about the daughter-in-law and the mother-in-law, the stock kind of soap opera TV shows, they are there. So there's a common kind of emotional register, if you like, which is there. But great country, great people, and which is why I get mad when, you know, sometimes some people try to take it in a narrow direction. That's where the anger comes from.
I love that. I think you're just amazing. So much for joining us. I love history, and so this is just so cool to me. Thank you so much.
You have to tell me, if you have half a minute, how you at 13 are doing this. You have to let on.
He's a tycoon. He's a tycoon in the making. He's never bored. He knows so much about history. He knows the world is his oyster, and he literally just delves into everything. But go ahead, Kai, tell.
Really?
Yeah, in April 2020, like at the very beginning of COVID, I'd always, like, if you had asked me when I was 5, I would have said, I want to own my own business. I want to do something, like, I want to be able to do something special. And so in the early days of COVID, a friend and I got together and we created this little weekly newsletter that would have volunteer writers. It wasn't anything really special. We'd have like a doctor write about COVID. Our goal was to take things and almost do explanatory journalism. My aunt, Bernie, came on. She's been a ginormous help. We had team members come on one by one. We eventually started our interview series, our YouTube channel, our social media, and we eventually mixed it all up and created that. Wow. And it's something where it's my dream to take things and look at them from a new angle. And that's my goal through this.
Well, all best of luck, and I'd love to keep in touch and know where you're going. I mean, great, absolutely great. All speed to you.
Thank you.
You.
Have a beautiful
Thank you.
And I loved hearing the